Welcome, welcome. I'm just going to give a moment or two for a few others to join us. Everyone can get situated. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to New Year, New Momentum, implementing a classroom management tune-up. My name is Odette Falone, Director of PD Specialist Success here at Inspired Instruction, and I appreciate all of you who are here today joining me to speak about some essential components of effective classroom management, as well as share some essential questions to troubleshoot existing implementations as we move into 2026, this new calendar year, with our students and working towards tuning up that classroom management for student success. All right, let's get started. So before we begin, I'm just going to frame our session, and again, welcome everybody, and share with you a couple of things that we want to keep in mind as we are going through today's webinar. First, I'd just like to share that today's session is designed for school leaders who are supporting classroom practice, as well as teachers looking to strengthen their classroom management mid-year. Whether you're currently in the classroom or supporting teachers that are, this session can provide you with some fresh new strategies and ideas as far as developing that classroom management and tuning things up as we are just about, halfway through our academic year. Really, I would like to also reiterate that this webinar is about reflection, not blame, refinement, not reinvention, and momentum, not overwhelm. We want to make sure that we're taking what's working in our classrooms because there's a lot that is, and really focusing on that and building on it, right? Not reinventing the wheel. We can make these tweaks and tune-ups at this stage, focus and build on what's strong. And we also want to, again, ask those right questions. We're going to be reflecting a lot during this session, talking about questions that we can be asking ourselves throughout the year as we look at our classroom and look at our practices and, make sure that we're reframing things in a positive direction. I also just want to acknowledge the January reality, right? Where we are at this point in the school year, right before break, we start to notice that routines start to drift, expectations need a little bit of recalibration, and that's why January is a great time to be able to tune up our classroom management and readdress some of those routines, expectations, and practices that we have for classroom management. We're in a good place to be able to refine that. And again, it's not a fail if we're having to make refinements to our classroom management. This is a good practice to have to reflect, refine, and keep things moving in that direction throughout our year with our students. So, having said all that, just to reiterate a little bit, why January in terms of classroom management? Why a classroom management tune-up right now? So I mentioned just a few moments ago, we notice that right before and especially after long breaks, we often see these types of things happening, right? There's a drift in the routines. There's inconsistent responses to behavior, whether that be from, our own as educators, we might be responding differently than we mean to after long breaks and things. We kind of lose sight of what those specific responses are that we want to be using. So we want to reframe that and reflect on that as well. There's increased disruptions and in some cases reduced instructional momentum. So this is a good time, a really good time to be able to take a close look at classroom management in the classrooms in our building, in our own personal classrooms, and tune things up. So again, it's an ideal time to pause, reflect, and realign. So just take a moment before we move forward and think about which classroom management routines tend to drift most after long breaks. Think about, is there something specific that you're noticing in your students that really has started to drift a little bit more than other routines or procedures? Feel free to drop that in the chat if you'd like. And we're going to be addressing some of those things as we move through today's webinar. Okay. So our webinar this afternoon will be focusing on three essential questions. We'll be answering these questions as we go through our time together today. And the first will be, why does effective classroom management matter for student success? Research strongly supports that classroom management is essential for student success, for student achievement. And we're going to take a look at that research together to really identify the why of why we are focusing on this specific topic at this time of year. We'll then answer the question as to what the core pillars of effective classroom management are. So we're going to be speaking to 5 key pillars today for classroom management success. And along with each of those pillars, we will also be identifying specific resources, strategies, ideas that you can use and implement immediately for effective classroom management. So again, stay tuned for those resources. I'll be sharing and demonstrating them today, as well as sending out an email after today's webinar with links to all the resources that we review and share this afternoon. So stay tuned for that. And finally, our third essential question that we'll be answering this afternoon is which reflective questions help educators troubleshoot practice? So we hope that you can leave today's session with some reflective questions to ask yourself, to ask your staff, to build that momentum for improvement, to really help you take a look at specific practices that are happening in your classroom and be able to identify where tweaks or tune-ups can be made. All right, so let's dive into that a little bit. So why does classroom management matter? Truly, classroom management is the foundation for learning. Um, Again, research shows that strong classroom management maximizes learning time, it supports student engagement, it reduces teacher stress and burnout, and it creates predictable, safe learning environments. Students need predictability. They thrive on that. And the more well managed a teacher's classroom is, the less burnt out he or she will feel at the end of the day, right? So that again is a big factor towards teacher retention as well as towards student success. Classroom management really is a precondition for learning. It's not separate from instruction. They need to work together hand in hand to be able to move students forward and see progress. So let's just keep that in mind that without strong classroom management, strong instruction will also struggle to land. So they need to be, again, once again, connected. There can't be a breakdown between the two because they need each other to be able to move students forward and accelerate student success. So what is the research telling us specifically about classroom management aligning with student success? Well, first of all, effective classroom management increases student engagement and achievement, right? As I said before, management is not separate from learning. It enables the learning to take place. If there are routines, expectations, predictability in the classroom, it allows a good space for students to have maximized time on task. They become, there's engagement factors. All of those things start to come into play when effective management is performed. Preventative systems outperform reactive discipline. So again, repeating it from before, but kind of reviewing that. Systems need to be in place, routines, procedures, rather than reacting to disorderly behavior or challenging behaviors. Having preventative systems in place is a much more effective way to manage a classroom. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that could look like and how to put those things together so that we are not reacting, but instead using pre-planned responses that align with our missions and goals and values. And finally, classroom climate strongly impacts teacher retention. So as I mentioned earlier, not only does classroom management affect student performance, but it also affects teacher retention. So this is a critical component of our classrooms and making sure that these pieces are in place to be able to move all of our students forward and, again, keep that classroom climate positive and strong. Okay. So just taking a quick deeper look at some of the research here, I have a table here that we're going to go through a little bit to answer the question, why does effective classroom management matter for student success? So you may be familiar with John Hattie. He has developed a way of synthesizing different influences in his analysis according to their effect size. So what does that mean exactly? So John Hattie ranked 138 different influences that affect or are related to learning outcomes for students. So some different items may have a very positive effect to student outcomes, and others may have a negative effect. On average, most have a zero point 0.4 effect size for learning outcomes. Now, what he was working towards here with this research and with this ranking system was to really answer the question, what works best in education, right? There are so many factors in students' lives, in their classroom experiences, in the practices that we put into play in our classrooms that affect student outcomes in a negative or a positive way. So what is working best and what isn't? And I put together some different pieces here, focusing on the topic of classroom management to take a look at some of his findings. So what you'll see is that suspension, for example, or students feeling disliked, have about a negative zero point 0.2 or negative 0.19 effect size on this scale. So those are in that negative sector there. Moving up on these rankings of effect size is a well-implemented classroom management plan. That has a 0.52 effect size for student outcomes. So well-implemented classroom management plan starts to increase student outcomes, and this is shown through these findings. Moving forward, student time on task. Now, in order to get there, the management component has to be in place. More student time on task, more positive student outcomes, right? At a 0.62. And here we have student-teacher relationships at a 0.72. So if a student feels valued, appreciated, has a good rapport with their teacher, that has a very positive effect on student outcomes, and it has been proven through these studies. So again, there's many more influences that are factors in student success. These are just a few that he has identified, but feel free to dive into that research a little bit if you haven't yet. It's extremely interesting. And you might even identify other components that could be factors of effective classroom management that really do have that positive effect on student outcomes. So really, just visually here, the importance in the research and the research in support of classroom management is very clear that a well-implemented classroom management plan is critical for student success and student progress. So having said that, why a tune-up and not a reset? Why are we not describing how to start over with classroom management? Well, there's many reasons for that, but I'd like to just point them out for you here today. A reset implies failure. That is not something that we are implying whatsoever. Instead, a tune-up assumes that there are systems that already exist, in many cases, great ones. And there are strengths that are present as well. But small adjustments can really create a big impact. So if we're able to, again, start to make some small adjustments, that ripple effect will bring us into a better place with our classroom management, will bring us to higher time on task, will bring us to more engagement, and again, lead to student progress. So there's almost a domino effect with a lot of this, and that's why small adjustments can really create a big impact. So I'll repeat this again later. I'm going to say it now. I said it earlier, but you really can build on what is working if you're able to identify that and tighten the things that have drifted a little bit. So that's what we're going to focus on here, identifying what expectations or what routines and procedures may have started to fall by the wayside after that long break, and what can we do to tighten them up and get things back on track. Okay. So you may have been thinking earlier about that question I asked. What are those common post-break drifts, right? What typically slips after breaks? And here are 4 common things that we have identified as routines or processes that typically start to slip after this long break. You might even start to see these things start to slip after the Thanksgiving break, and it kind of carries its way through into the month of December, and then you really start to notice it as students return after that long break. So the and transition routines that we may have in place. How are students entering the classroom? How are they transitioning from one subject to another or one class to another? Their voice level expectations. You kind of have to set that tone again to remind them of what level their voices need to be for different activities that you're engaging in. And we'll talk very explicitly about that. Their independent work stamina starts to slip a little bit, right? We have to really gear that back up. And then their consistent follow through. So, as I said, this kind of sums up that question we asked earlier, but all of these affect student time on task, which again, we saw from our chart earlier with John Hattie, that has a very positive effect on student outcomes. So we need to get that back. If these things are affecting our students' time on task, that's in turn negatively affecting their outcomes. So we need to make sure that there is alignment there. The good news, these are all fixable with intention. So we're going to talk through some of the ways that we can start to address these things if they've started to slip a little bit after the winter break. All right, so we've answered our question, why it matters. Here we're going to start to address essential question two, the core pillars of effective classroom management. I'm going to go through each of these pillars quickly here with you now, and then I'm going to dive a little deeper into each of the five. With each pillar, I'll share a little bit of context, as well as some strategies, resources, templates, things that can be implemented immediately that align with each of the pillars. And our school leaders can be tapping into putting some of these into practice in terms of consistency across classrooms. And our teachers can start to implement them into their classrooms to see an immediate effect. So just to start and kind of sum up, the pillars of an effective classroom management system should include clear expectations and procedures. Super specific. Clear is kind, especially for students. We need to be explicit about what our expectations are. Never expect or assume that they know what you mean. We need to make sure that we're super clear, and I'll share some different ways that we can really tap into them. Secondly, consistent implementation of routines. Routines become a part of your classroom culture and they become a part of your students' experience in your classroom. It's how they learn executive functioning skills. There's a whole lot that goes into that. And establishing those predictable routines and procedures is critical for, on time on task, as well as just to maximize that learning time. Third is positive relationships and belonging. You saw again with John Hattie, we talked about how important that is in terms of student outcomes. What a positive effect having a positive relationship with your students can have. So building trust, rapport between teachers and students, again, is critical for classroom management. Fourth is engagement-driven instruction. So getting that authentic engagement and really tapping into that active participation and interest within your students. If your students are engaged, they're likely to be on task and involved and working with you. So we'll talk about some strategies to keep that momentum going. And finally, aligned responses to behavior. So positive reinforcement, rewarding when you see these routines, expectations, and procedures are being followed, encouragement, repetition, all of that needs to kind of be what ties it all together. So all of this to say, these five pillars work together. They're not to be taught in isolation. They should all be components of what's included in your classroom management plan. So now we're going to dive a little deeper into each. Okay, so clear expectations and procedures, pillar one. Clear is kind, as I mentioned earlier. Clarity prevents confusion. So strong classrooms have explicitly taught expectations. They have modeled routines. They practice those routines and expectations, and there's always ongoing reinforcement. Even though you've continuously reinforced a routine or an expectation for months, don't stop. Keep that reinforcement going because that's when those drifts start to happen. So what can this look like? I want you to think about where you see your students losing instructional time, right? So is it during lining up? Maybe they're losing part of their special because they're disorderly when they're lining up, they're not getting out the door on time. Maybe it's during group work. Maybe during transition time, right? Between subjects or classes, or maybe during independent work. Wherever you identify that there is an exceeding amount of instructional time being lost, that might be where you want to start in terms of tuning up a specific routine or procedure. So, speaking to clear expectations and procedures, what are some things that we can do now to start to tap into this pillar in particular? The first is super explicit behavior specific expectations. So we tend to use language like this, be respectful, more often than we even realize, right? Be nice, be kind, be respectful. All true, all things that we should be encouraging in our classrooms. But many students may not even understand exactly what that means or what that looks like to you. So instead of those more broad or vague statements like, excuse me, please be respectful, you might want to clarify that and repeat it. During group work, respectful behavior looks like voices at a level 2 and eyes on the speaker. So you're looking for those two things. And you can start to identify when you see students are not speaking at a voice level 2 or when their eyes are not on the speaker. And those are very specific and explicit things that you can point out and redirect and, again, make that connection between how that is what being respectful looks like in your classroom. Next is to assume nothing, reteach, right? So you want to think about, okay, when you want to select one high impact routine. So that could be arrival, transitions, independent work, like we mentioned earlier. And you're going to reteach that routine as if it's the first week of school. You want to explain the why. You want to model the steps, show them exactly what you're talking about, practice and provide feedback. So you might say, when we work in groups, we need to be mindful of our voices because our peers need to be able to hear each other. And we want to be, again, showing respect by speaking at a level 2 or having our eyes on the speaker. And then you practice that. If you're focusing on having your students speak at a voice level 2, show them what all the voice levels look like. And I have a poster to share with you after this. But you might say, okay, everyone in the class, I want to hear a voice level 0. That should sound like nothing. I should hear not a voice, not a sound, not a whisper, I could hear a pin drop in here. Have them practice it. Give them feedback. Okay, now okay, I want to hear a voice level 1. That's whispering. Okay, so have them show you what it sounds like to whisper in your class. That's a voice level 1. Now let's hear a voice level 2. That's talking at a normal voice, right? In a group. And you can, again, you get the idea. You go up to a level 3, level 4, and have them explicitly show you what that voice level sounds like. Go back and forth between all the numbers, have them practice to really lock it in and get them very clear on what your expectation is for that. And third, a visual reminder. As simple as it might sound, this can work wonders in a classroom if you're able to point to a visual to demonstrate exactly what your expectations are. So post your expectations where students use them. By the door, for example. If you want your students to be reminded on how exactly they should be lining up in class when they're leaving the classroom, take a picture or find one online of a group of students lined up nice and neat and show that. You might even want to show the opposite and show a line that's disjointed and say, okay, this is a check mark. Yes, this is what I expect. This is a circle with a line through it. No, this is not what I expect. And referencing those visuals over and over during instruction. Every time you line up, this is what I'm looking for. I see this person and that person are lining up exactly like this expectation. Let's get the rest of us in this line like this. Those images can really be a very big factor for many students to be able to absolutely see what your expectation is. I've even used it in the past with desk organization. A picture of a neat desk of how it should look, and a picture of a desk that's a mess where everything's falling out. And have them really identify, okay, we don't want our desks to look like this, we want it to look like this, and here's how we could get it there. Okay. All right, so some supporting resources to go along with those strategies. I mentioned about the voice levels poster. And this poster, again, along with the 5 pillars of education of classroom management, downloadable that I mentioned earlier, and a few others that you'll see today, will all be available to you at the end of today's session. They'll be emailed directly to your inbox. So this voice levels poster is very simple. It's exactly as you would imagine, but it's something that you could print out, laminate it, put it in a page protector, stick it up at the front of your classroom. And again, explicitly teach students how to use these, how to speak in these particular levels, right? So practicing what a 0 looks like, practicing what a 4 looks like. Even if you're in the classroom, let's hear a 4, right? And then vice versa, right? So keeping that routine going. And this is a nice way to kind of remind students, okay, today in our independent work, we're working at a voice level 0. If you're working in a turn and talk, you're working at a voice level 1, and keeping those expectations clear. Another great tune-up tool that I'm going to share with you is a classroom management, tune-up resource that really takes you step by step, kind of in the process that I was explaining earlier, identifying that one high impact routine. So is it arrival? Is it transitions? Is it group work? Is it something else? And define what you expect and what you want to be happening during that time. So if you're able to describe that, if you're able to put into words what you would like to observe students doing during that time, it can be helpful for how you teach it explicitly. Then it gives you that breakdown of how you're going to teach it, model it, practice it, reinforce it, reminding you that you have to have all those steps in order for it to be taught explicitly. And you even gives you a space here for behavior specific language for the routine. I'll show this again later, but it might sound funny to create yourself a script or a line that you might repeat to your students that is very behavior specific. But I will say, if you have something written down that you can refer to and it's tucked away in the back of your mind because you've planned it out, it's much easier to reach for this statement in a time when you need to reiterate or recorrect a student's behavior instead of reacting. Sometimes we've all done it. Sometimes we react to something that's a negative behavior in a way that we probably didn't want to. But if we have a behavior specific statement kind of tucked away, it's something that we could pull out and say, this is what I'm going to say each and every time I need to redirect this kind of behavior. It's a great go-to. It's also very consistent, and it reinforces things for your students. So again, this checklist here just gives you, again, additional pieces and questions that you can ask yourself to reflect, but it walks you through that reinforcement of how to tune up a specific area where you notice that there is a little bit of a drift taking place. Okay, so back to our slides here. Reaching in or speaking to pillar number 2, explicit instruction and consistent implementation. Consistency is key. It builds trust. It makes predictability for your students. It builds a reliable, predictable classroom. But you really need to, again, follow through. Keep that follow through happening over time. Students love to know what's happening next. They like to be in the know, and the predictability of your classroom allows that to happen for them. So, as I mentioned earlier, that planning piece can help with predictability. Planning out that language might feel funny, but if you're able to kind of have a couple of go-to phrases, even taped on your desk, repeat it over time, it can really be helpful. So to have that go-to line. It also is excellent if classrooms across the school building use a similar consistent line. So students are hearing it from multiple teachers across the building. And again, it does just continue to reinforce specific behaviors that we're looking for. So some supporting strategies to go along with pillar 2, the if and then teacher planning. So planning ahead, again, that's a common theme for me today, but thinking to yourself, if students don't meet this expectation, then I will respond by saying this, right? We're not going to respond in a reactive way. And this prevents that in the moment kind of quick response that you might make and regret later, or inconsistent response where you might say one thing to one student and something different to someone else. If you have that if then in your mind, it does really help with that follow through so it's consistent for every student. So those scripted redirections go in a similar vein. Having 2 or 3 neutral phrases that you might say, remember our expectation for independent work. Try that again, following our procedure, and identify the procedure. But using the same language every time is very important. And leaders, that's a support strategy for you, is just really encouraging that shared language across grade levels, across departments. So your music teacher, your PE teacher, your ELA teacher, your math teacher, they're using common language across the building, and students are hearing this no matter where they're learning. This again can continue that reinforcement and support teachers in all aspects of this classroom management facet. All right, so relationships of belonging, pillar three. Um, my favorite, just really making those connections is super important and so valuable for students in your classroom, the time that they're there and beyond. Uh, it has been proven through research that connection drives compliance, right? Students are motivated to work for teachers that they feel value them as individuals, that they feel, they get along with. So when they feel known, when they feel safe, students are more likely to follow expectations, engage in learning, accept redirection. All these things that we're working towards really starts with the rapport that we build with students. So there's some small, little tweaks again, small moves, big wins that we can make to start building some of that relationship, start building some of those relationships. One is just the belonging signals. So speaking to students in the sense that there's an inclusivity, right? Greeting them at the door, using their names when you speak to them, speaking about your classroom as a whole unit, our class, our goals, our mission, and highlighting the strengths publicly and making corrections privately, right? So whenever possible to be able to do that, really, pump up those students that are showing you their strengths, and make that something that others want to do too. Connection before correction is another piece I'd like to share. So I know I mentioned using the student's name, but acknowledging their effort and redirecting them can kind of go all hands in hand. Before you start to correct, you make that connection, right? So using their name, for example, Melody, I see you're really excited. Let's refocus on the task at hand. Starting with that connection, then the correction. Okay, so for pillar four, engagement-driven instruction. I really truly believe, and again, research shows that engagement is a management strategy. We sometimes think of it as two separate things, right? We have our engagement strategies, we have our management strategies. However, high engagement reduces off-task behavior, reduces disruptions and power struggles and all those things. If you're really designing and crafting your lessons and activities to incorporate high engagement and student-centered learning, you're going to be preventing many of the behavior challenges that could come your way. So maybe tweaking and refining some of your engagement strategies or trying something fresh and new could be a way that you tune up your classroom management this year. So some supporting strategies for that pillar. One would be an engagement audit. So you want to ask yourself and say, okay, how often are students doing something versus just listening to me? Are the tasks appropriately challenging? Because those are two things that, if the answer suggests, you might be able to find a root cause to some of the behavior disruptions that you're having. Are you spending a lot of time standing up in front of the room talking to your students? And is the amount of time that they're actually engaging with something minimal? If the answer is yes, you really want to chunk and check. Break your instruction into 8 to 10 minute chunks. You want to be speaking to students no more than that amount of time before you start to inject engagement checks, turn and talks, whiteboards, polls, gestures, something that they're doing that will allow them to show you what they know and engage with the content. So some quick things to have on hand are there on the screen in front of you, but we also have this great resource, all student response tasks. You might know them as total participation techniques. These are ways that you can keep students engaged. Strategies that you can have in your back pocket. If you feel that instruction time going long, you can pause and pull one of these out. These promote positive behaviors because they really keep students cognitively involved. So as I said, this will be shared with you this will be shared with you at the end of today. But just take a peek at what it looks like. We have 15 different tasks that you can share with students to get them engaged, sharing with you what they know, talking with each other, learning from each other, and processing the content. So take a moment to scroll through these, print a few out that you like a lot, hang them up, and engage your students in these activities to get them learning in a new way. All right. So we made our way to pillar five, aligned response to behavior. So the responses that you provide to students to their behavior when you're correcting them, things like that. These effective systems that include aligned responses should have calm responses. They should all align to the expectations that you are providing to students. And they should, again, focus on reteaching, not necessarily punishing. So PBIS, positive behavior intervention systems, they remind us that behavior is learned and it can be relearned. So again, focusing on reteaching is super important. Where it may sometimes feel like it's not, behavior can be learned and relearned and tweaked and retaught explicitly through specific strategies. So some ready to use strategies here for pillar five. One focuses really on teacher reflection. So you want to use quick reflection prompts. What was the expectation? What will you do differently next time? With educators, in my experience, reflection is something that happens constantly. It's something we're doing all the time, maybe without even realizing it. When you're driving home from work and you're thinking to yourself, yeah, wow, that was a great lesson today. I'm going to make sure I do this and this and this again next time. That's reflection. If you're thinking to yourself, you know what, today was one of those days where nothing was going right. And I think it was because of how I entered the classroom that morning, or, there was when I snapped about something early in the day, and then that set the tone for the rest of the day. You start to reflect on those kinds of things, at different points of your life. But focusing your reflection specifically on these kinds of questions can help improve your alignment to pillar five. So what I have here is just something to help you celebrate positive behaviors. I know how much teachers have on their plate and how much communication is involved, but in many cases, we tend to reach out to parents when there is a problem or challenge, and it's great practice to be able to also reach out in case of positive behaviors if you have that opportunity. Celebrating the good, right? So these postcards can be printed out on cardstock, cut out. This one you could just cut it out and write on the back if to a student to send home if they did a great day, had a great day. This one has a little bit more of a scaffold, right? You could check off a box and write a little note at the bottom. But really, essentially, it's very basic and simple, but the feeling that a student will get from receiving one of these from you as their educator is a great motivator, a great relationship builder, and even continues to build your relationship with parents to show them you are noticing the good and you are seeing those things and that their children are doing positive things in the classroom every day. Right. Okay. So just to continue to think about essential question three, and that really ties nicely into pillar five, is thinking of how important reflection is. Reflection as educators in any career that we are working in is an important tool for improvement. And why does it matter? When you are reflecting, you are able to identify gaps, you're able to adjust your practice, you improve your consistency. It is a critical practice for teachers to spend some time reflecting, whether it's, intentional or not. But the more that you can make it intentional, the more improvement you'll see. So I've again listed here a resource that you'll receive, but it lists a few different questions that can help you identify where you'd like to focus your tune-up. So just some reflective questions. Again, let me go back there. Whoop, sorry about that. Going back. Okay. Here we are. Listing these essential questions and taking a look at those and maybe, picking one or two that you can review when you have that moment to kind of refine and refresh your classroom management strategies. It'll help guide you towards that. Okay, so last little piece here, some reflective questions that to just get you started. For leaders, thinking about what consistency looks like across classrooms. So again, you don't want to have one huge fell swoop of all different kinds of things that are going to be changing and happening across the board. But what does that look like for you as a school leader? And what can you implement to start to integrate that consistency? Is it the language? Is it the routines? Or is it the visuals? Do we want to use the noise level poster across the board in all classrooms, in the lunchroom, at recess, all over the place, and have them walk out and say, okay, here we are at a voice level 4, here we are at a voice level 3. So again, thinking about what procedures and policies you want to adopt to bring across the board across your classrooms. And are those expectations reinforced school-wide? So in each individual classroom, there shouldn't be necessarily isolation. There may be expectations that are reinforced at the school level, as well as in each classroom as well. When you see that there are classroom management challenges, what feedback do teachers receive? And where can we support those teachers and not necessarily inspect them? For teachers, which routines feel less effective than before during break? So starting there, thinking about that. And again, I know there's so much on your plate. So this is where you want to be able to think, okay, where can I begin? And having sometimes just that starting point can really be helpful to start a little bit of a tune-up. Where am I assuming things and where do disruptions most often happen? What's one routine that I can explicitly teach? And having those support systems in place really can drive the improvement. So I'm challenging you to a 10-day classroom management tune-up. Again, thinking about small moves that are going to make big payoff. So over the next 10 days, challenge yourself to reteach just one routine, reinforce one expectation, strengthen one engagement strategy, and check consistency for yourself through reflection 1 time per week. If you're able to kind of put that into your process of your daily, weekly to-dos, let's say, you will see, again, one routine change, one expectation reinforcement. There will be big payoff for those changes. Hopefully, some of the strategies that we share today, the resources that you'll be receiving, can help support in some of these reteaching, strengthening, and reinforcing, and consistency checks. So just keep in mind that those small moves can really ripple into big wins in several areas, not just in classroom management, but also in engagement or student time on task, and so on. So to sum up our New Year, New Momentum webinar, just reinforcing the idea that clarity creates momentum. Strong classroom management, it's not about control. Even though we hear that term, it feels like it is, but it's really about clarity, consistency, and connection. So as you move forward, try to think about what's drifted and reteach that, reinforce the parts that matter most, and reflect and refine when you can. Those small little tune-ups really can lead to stronger routines, calmer classrooms, and just in general, more learning every day. Some additional ways that Inspired Instruction can support, if you're looking for additional support with classroom management in your building, we offer several different workshops as well as instructional coaching on this topic. But these are 3 options that we do have in our catalog that are related learning opportunities for classroom management. So take a photo and maybe think about making a connection with an Inspired Instruction client director soon. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. It has been wonderful spending the time with you today. I hope that everyone was able to take something valuable off from today's webinar. If you have any questions, I will remain here to answer them, as well as provide you here with our email address, info@inspiredinstruction.com, to which you're welcome to send questions as well. And as I mentioned, we will reach out shortly with a one-page that includes links to all the resources and activities that you saw this afternoon. So thank you. I wish you all a wonderful rest of the week, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon. Okay, let's see. Kenneth, I see you have a question. Let me get to that here. Oh, wonderful. Oh, thank you so much. Let me see if I can unmute you. Okay. Okay, Kenneth, yes, I should be okay to unmute there.
Hi,
Yeah, go
how are
ahead.
you doing?
Good, wonderful, thank you.
Um, will we be able to get this recording or PowerPoint presentation?
So we'll actually be able to share with you a list of all the resources that were shared, and the recording of this webinar will also be available on our website for anyone for free, for anyone to access and view.
All right, Thank you so much. This was
You're
really
welcome.
good. I really appreciate it.
Oh, so happy to hear it. Thank you so much and have a great afternoon.
You do the same.
Thank you.